Good morning, everyone. My name is Peter Grabiec. It is 10 a.m. here in San Antonio, Texas, and so I will begin the presentation. I think that we are still awaiting a few people coming in. If you do have any questions, please write them in the chat space. They will all be attended to at the end of the conference. Otherwise, I will go ahead and begin. So my name is Peter Grabiec. I'm an export project manager for the Minority Business Development Agency Export Center. We office out of the University of Texas at San Antonio, in San Antonio, Texas. Here's a little bit of my information. So today we have a brief training session, a brief workshop. There are a few things that we're going to go over very quickly. I'm just going to discuss the Minority Business Development Agency, the Export Center, and the work that we do. I will do a brief review of the year in review, or at least the 3 quarters of the year in review. Just looking over some trade data and letting us know what the picture looks like. And then finally, I will introduce a forecasting tool that I'm using with many of my clients in order to get control, and it's essentially a executive level control mechanism for clients to be able to forecast and to more accurately forecast their future growth in international markets over time. And then there will be some time for Q&A at the end. And as I mentioned, please write any questions in the chat box, and I will attend to those at the end. So who we are, we are the Minority Business Development Agency Export Center. We office out of San Antonio, Texas. There are 4 export centers in the country, and we focus primarily on exports into Latin America, though our team are all international trade experts with many years experience, and we can help firms deal with trade issues in any market. However, many of our databases and business-to-business matchmaking tools have a preferential focus across Latin America. Our mission, so the U.S. Department of Commerce, MBDA, I'm going to refer to it as the MBDA from now on. I live in a world of acronyms on one side of my interface. We're the only federal agency solely dedicated to the growth and global competitiveness of minority business enterprises. Here is a brief definition of the firms that we work with. They have to be at least 51% U.S. interests, which can identify, self-certify as one of the U.S. government's recognized ethnic minorities, and here's a list for you. So what do we do? The MBDA promotes the growth of minority-owned businesses through the mobilization and advancement of public and private sector programs, policy, and research. And my center is one of the programs. Here's just a brief snapshot of the MBDA landscape. Here are many of our offices. The standard MBDA offices are in blue. These are the ones that simply offer business consulting and business resources to firms in their region. The specialty centers are in black. And as you can see down here in San Antonio, I don't know if you see my pointer, we have 2 specialty centers. One is the Export Center that I work at. We also have an advanced manufacturing center that focuses on Industry 4.0 and commercializing advanced technology in minority businesses. So that's as far as I'll go on the brief introduction. Excuse me one moment. Looking at the year in review, obviously the large mitigating factor has been the COVID-19 epidemic and the epidemiological constraints that it has imposed on all of us. Here I have a graph that was put together by Goldman Sachs. This is an index that attempted to measure the effect of COVID-19 across industries. There has been a substitution effect. Some industries have boomed, especially industries such as logistics, online communications, information and communications technology. We're all using one of those platforms here as we're using Zoom for this event. But overall economic demand, and by extension, the sales of firms in the US during the lockdown period, had gone down to about 36% of the year-over-year average, meaning that sales were essentially down holistically across the US economy about 64%. As we can see here, this study was published in late June or early July. I believe there's a date here. It was the end of June. And so we started to see an economic recovery at that point as the lockdown was easing, to where the economy had holistically recovered to only down about 40%. So the reason that I wanted to show this initial graph is I have done some of my own research and published some of my own research on the effects of trade, the effects of COVID-19 on trade flows on the aggregate. So the data here is taken from Comtrade. This is where basically countries around the world report their trade statistics. The customs organizations report their trade statistics to the UN, United Nations, to the World Trade Organization. The same data can be found in the US. So for exports through the Department of Commerce International Trade Administration, which aggregates this according to Schedule B, Harmonized Tariff schedule codes, and then imports can be found at the census, which the census monitors import activity through the Harmonized Tariff schedule. What we have here is the completed graphs here at the top, the red, green, and blue one, are the activity for the last 3 years. This is aggregate trade by volume. The Incoterm is FOB, if anyone is familiar with logistics. And then the purple line here is what we have seen with data available through July on United States exports. So as you can see, comparatively, exports have proven to be more resilient. This data stops in June. Exports have proven to be more resilient than the overall economy. And you can see here in July that they almost return on trend. And I have some analysis here a little bit further. Here we look at imports. And imports, again, you can see the decline was far less than what we saw on the aggregate in the economy. And as you can see in July here, imports were actually higher than they were in 2017. So imports have declined less than exports. I'll show the export graph again for comparison. And they have rebounded a little bit more strongly. In both cases, by the end of summer, imports were back on trend. Here I have just some slightly more sophisticated analysis. The blue graph is a seasonality, the blue line is a seasonality analysis for US trade flows, again, on the aggregate. So what this is showing is the percentage variance from the monthly average. US trade tends to have its peak kind of early and late on exports. So the middle months that we were looking at tend to be under the average. And what I've done here is I've shown lines. So I've shown the yellow line just shows the variance from average, but the green line probably gives the most information. This is the variance of trade after it is seasonally adjusted. So as we can see here at its bottom, exports in May were down about 34.5%. And by July, which we only have updated data through July, it's been a couple of weeks since I've checked. I don't know if the August numbers are out yet. But by July, the aggregate exports were only down about 10% off of trend. July is traditionally a slow month, at least looking at the last 3 years data. It's 7% off the average. So when you adjust for that, we're only down about 10% on exports. So the story here is that there's a resiliency in international trade. There are several reasons for that, and I'm just going to give you a little bit of the narrative at the moment. The actual logistics and transportation of trade have not been terribly affected. U.S. trade has, now that's a loaded term. They have been affected by demand effects, but they have not been inhibited. So where the firms wish to engage the customs and logistics entities, they're ready to do business. So there are a few countries, especially in the developing world, which have had spotty customs service, sometimes only a few hours per day, where they were able to process customs. However, for much of the world, customs and logistics has proven relatively resilient. This is just, we're talking about ports and ships here. So it's more easy to do social distancing. It's more easy to continue these activities during a pandemic, compared to, let's say, obviously the most affected sectors have been the service sector, where, it's very difficult to social distance. There's a lot of direct contact between frontline employees and the public. So on the actual processing of trade, it's proven to be very resilient. The big challenge, and I'm sure that many in the audience here have seen this, has been resuming new business, the deal making. Obviously, the deal makers, the people that are putting the deals together that lead to this trade, they're unable to travel as much as they used to. Meetings have moved from face-to-face to Zoom, and so we've seen some, and we haven't measured the effect of those challenges. We're only measuring the effect of the actual trade here, but we have seen some difficulty in deals moving forward, simply because of the inability for deal makers to travel and to continue their business. The extent to which these alternate communications platforms are being utilized to make deals go forward, we're seeing that happen, and that's obviously a very normative, not a quantitative factor. Though here we can see on the data that in trade, at least, it has proven to be resilient, and we've essentially seen a V-shaped recovery, even as early as the summer. Here is the same type of graph for imports. Imports, unsurprisingly, are off trend early in the year, and they pick up late in the year as we gear up for Christmas season. Also, this the decline in February, a big part of that is this is when Chinese New Year's takes place. So any of you out there that do large volumes of import business with China know that there's a real slowdown as that country essentially grinds to a halt for almost for several weeks during Chinese New Year. Just a few quick factors, and I want to move on to the forecasting tool. So some of the big things that we have seen in terms of looking at this data and making inferences to the broader economy. International trade is obviously a different slice of the supply chain. It tends to focus more on wholesale and commodities distribution. So one of the mitigating factors in trying to make any inferences on my research to the broader economy, one is, of course, the substitution effect, which we are seeing here. Traditionally, the substitution effect may be something, so your proteins, if the price of chicken goes up, you might eat more red meat and fish, or legumes, or other sources of protein. Same thing with grains. If the price of rice goes up, you may eat more corn or flour or some other things. We have seen a large substitution effect in the economy. As I've mentioned previously, certain sectors in information and communications technology, groceries, logistics, these have boomed in the current environment as so many more people are working from home and not going out into the public. And then obviously the service sector, especially areas such as hospitality, restaurants, those have suffered the most as the substitution effects, the economic ramifications of COVID-19 have played themselves out. Second effect is inflationary effects. There may be some inflationary effects happening in different sectors of the society. I think I have some pictures here on cosmic inflation, which is not what we're talking about. Simple example of inflation is, we look at a cup of coffee here, what it cost in 1970 compared to 2010, 2020. Oil prices are an area where we see inflationary effects play out, commodities in general. So there may be some inflationary effects out in the economy. that are not captured in just looking at trade flows, which again is a specific slice of the economy. And then the last mitigating factor, this has been a recessionary, clearly there have been recessionary effects. In the boom and bust cycle, one of the things that we see in the business cycle is during down growth periods, there are a lot of mergers and acquisition, especially as smaller firms tend to run into liquidity constraints, and then the larger firms, which have deeper pockets, will often acquire. And we have seen considerable amounts of mergers and acquisitions during the current epidemic. So next, I will move on into the forecasting tool template. So this may be familiar to many of you. This is just the template that I send out to many new clients and existing clients in an effort to collect more data to help you grow your international business. So essentially, what I asked for here is for each firm to essentially list out now, and some firms may already do this in some way, shape, or form, but essentially to list out the companies that you are currently exporting to at any given state, their website, the country that they're going into, the annual exports that you forecast for the year, and then the jobs created, jobs retained part, the estimates on what this effect is going to be. This is largely more, this is less of interest to the companies. This is more of interest to our reporting our reporting agency in Washington, D.C. Obviously, public funds are devoted to the work that I do to help minority firms such as yours thrive and to increase supply chain diversification in international supply chains. The thing that the politicians are interested in is the job creation here. Exports are a source of job creation, so are foreign direct investment. Imports and cash outflows, which in the US, we tend to get more foreign direct investment simply because we have a trade deficit. And then, of course, public funds are devoted to export promotion because that, again, is a source of job creation. So here I have just the template that I send out for firms to complete. And then I will exit this mode and I will go to, please let me know in chat if you see this Excel, but I'm sorry, this is the wrong Excel file. Someone please let me know in chat if you see this Excel file. And I apologize for any delay. Let me just share the screen fresh to make sure that, that this is working. Okay, so here is a sample. Obviously, any information that is shared is privileged per standard non-disclosure agreements that we have on our intake forms. So essentially, this is what a completed form might look like. Actually, it's usually only completed through about column D. The remaining columns are some of the analysis that I do. So the information that I'm provided tends to be the company information, as you see in column A, website, the country, and a forecast of what the annual exports are expected to be. Later, the analysis that I do, so there's two primary types of analysis that I do with this information. The first one is the list of companies. I run those through several of our databases. And essentially what I'm doing here is I'm trying to create a company profile for the types of firms that you currently do business with. And the goal is to use that profile for data mining in order to identify likely firms that you can do business with. Essentially, it's a business matchmaking tool in new countries that we look at, or in expanding your presence in existing countries where you do business. This is just a very data objective, data intensive way of doing research to identify basically the next targets for your firm. So that's one side of this, is simply the company information I use to establish a profile, various kind of industry tags that are used in databases that I have access to. And some of these I'll just mention to you. Hoover's, Dun & Bradstreet is one that we use. We use BN Americas, which is a very strong tool for looking at infrastructure projects and various more commodity-oriented opportunities across Latin America. Datamine is another one that we use. These are all proprietary, so we actually purchase licenses to get access to these for your benefit. That's DATAMYNE. This is a program where we can look directly at trade flows, and we can many times see, according to Harmonized Tariff Schedule, we can many times see customs information directly here, such as information of who is actually picking up these products, what legal entity is picking up these products at port in the countries that we're targeting. So that's what I use the company information that you provide for. The second side of this is, of course, is going to be the forecasting side. So here, the information that you provide goes as far as the forecast. At the end of the year, we look at actual numbers. You'll provide me the actual numbers, and for my reporting purposes, I will ask for things like purchase orders, basically proof of the transactions. This is essentially what you provide us in lieu of payment, so that we can put that into our reports and send them to our head office in Washington, D.C., just to validate and verify the work that we're doing. And as you can see here, I'm not going to spend too much time in this because this was only intended to be a 30-minute workshop. Once you give me the annual report information, I plug that in and I do a variance analysis to basically see how accurate our forecasts are. And then the end goal of this is to create a year-over-year template. And it's not letting me change sheets here. Give me just one moment. I may have to reshare this page. I apologize for the delay here. So in the end here, what we're looking to do, and this is more an executive level of management, this is more kind of what the executive level may be interested in, is to get an idea of how accurate our forecasts are. And this is going to be year over year. So we can do this according to company. If you have a sales team and there's certain agents that have, within your firm that have certain accounts, we can obviously subdivide this into, the portfolio of each agent and essentially see how accurate our forecasts are year over year. I'm looking at this year over year. We can also do this as slightly more frequently. We can do a quarter over quarter analysis. At this point, this is the template. How we utilize the template is very much governed by the communication and information sharing that between me and yourselves, my clients. So we can always adjust this and customize it more to the needs of your business. But the general idea here is to establish a forecasting tool. It's twofold. It's one, to establish a profile of your company, which can be used for data mining efforts to more objectively target expansions into other markets, and specifically to the extent of business-to-business matchmaking, the end goal of which is emails and phone numbers and individuals that we can target and reach out to. The second part of it is more the forecasting and control side. So with that, let me go back to the presentation. I think that we're actually a little bit ahead of schedule. I've left a few minutes here for Q&A. We managed to get into this, go through this in a little under half an hour. Let me just find the... I'm sorry. So at this point, if anybody has any questions, please put them into the chat window. Let me get to where I can see that, and I will be happy to respond to them. I actually have more time. I have, I can easily stay on for an extra half hour if anyone has any questions. I did advertise this as a 30-minute training session, and so it looks like we are well within. And it looks like, unfortunately, I need to stop sharing to get into the chat. So give me just a moment here to read the questions. And again, if you have any new questions. So one of the questions here is, how do we utilize this type of information to help minority firms expand their business specifically for the firm? So in addition to what I've said, one of the, and actually I'm paraphrasing here, the notes are a little bit more specific about the aggregate analysis that I conducted. So the aggregate analysis that I did was really on the big picture, looking at overall trade flows. When we look into the specifics of your firm, I will often look into the trade flows that are specific to your industry, whatever products or services. Services are a little bit more difficult on the data side because the data collection mechanisms are not quite as advanced. But primarily what we do is we get the harmonized tariff schedule for your industry, and we'll analyze the trade flows specifically. And we do this we can do this at the large scale of a feasibility study, looking at what your next best market is, doing this, of course, with objective data. We can do this at your existing markets, looking at opportunities for expansion. In all cases, our analysis keeps in mind what markets you're familiar with. So for example, if you're familiar with doing business in Mexico and Canada, it factors in cultural and linguistic sort of proclivities of those countries in doing an analysis and weighing as what the next market in terms of feasibility may be. Obviously, spreading into other Spanish-speaking countries or potentially even French. If you only do business in Canada and Mexico, we can look at Spanish and French-speaking countries, for example, especially if you're doing business with firms in Quebec. But essentially, we start with the aggregate trade flows, and then we look more specifically into the industry. Harmonized tariff schedules are really established specifically for trade, not necessarily for industries. Sometimes the terms and the classifications can differ from the terms and classifications specific to the industry. A good example is things like metals. There are certain ways that metals are organized in the harmonized tariff schedule for trade and tariff purposes primarily. These are done by negotiation of trade agreements between governments. And then, of course, the firms working in this area have different sets of metrics in terms of grades, qualities, composites, and so on and so forth. So where we get to this level, it's a little more art than science. Looking at the trade flow data that we have, and then the industry specific data that we have, and coming to the decision of what the best target markets are out there. There's a little bit of that's about as far as we can go on the objective and quantitative analysis. And at that point, it gets to a bit of a more heuristic analysis. And again, the biggest factor I've found in my experience, and I've been doing this for almost 20 years now, is the communication factor with the clients. The more information we share, especially where we get to the point where we're doing a heuristic analysis, the more accurate our targets can be. And then, of course, I look at the hindsight results of this and try to establish what the best practices are to help U.S. firms, and in my capacity under the MBDA minority-owned U.S. firms, be successful in international markets. So there's a few more questions here. There's one question here. So what are the biggest challenges specific to growth and development of minority-owned firms? So one of the bigger challenges here tends to be access to capital. And this is one area where we focus on as well. Essentially, the three mandates that I have in working with minority-owned firms is helping them get access to international markets, to international contracts, and to capital in order to provide liquidity to grow their businesses. So the MBDA does have a very large ecosystem. NAIC is one of the organizations that we aggregate this under, which is the National Association of Investment Companies. That came to my mind very quickly. And there are several kind of other smaller organizations within this ecosystem, including the MBDA, where we essentially attempt to aggregate, organize, and push initiatives through this community of lenders that are very specific to helping minority-owned businesses get access to capital. And some of this goes from conventional banking to private equity, venture capital, kind of spreads that, covers that spectrum. On the private equity, venture capital, you really have to aggregate the players involved. So if this is an area that you're looking at, this tends to be more technology, more higher risk industries. Be on the lookout for communications from me that point out events. The other thing that I'll mention, especially for minority-owned firms, I tend to work with firms that are much further along in their development, firms that are established, that have years of track record, that are large enough to engage in international markets. But it is important to also, especially with minority-owned firms, to look at the early stages of capital investment and capital growth. And one of the challenges there seems to be, looking at the aggregate research, is it's much harder. A lot of small businesses, as they start and grow in the earlier stage, the early access to capital tends to be kind of the friends and family circuit. And simply because of the historical challenges and historical positions of many minorities, it's much more difficult to aggregate capital in this early stage, the seed capital, in order to get small companies started. Most of my colleagues work more in this area. As I mentioned, my area of specialization is international trade, so I tend to focus on the firms that are further along in this. But even in working with many of them, they'll tell me the stories of what the early seed funding rounds looked like. So that's another area. If you have firms in your purview, obviously, that are looking at international business, refer them to me directly and I can help them directly. If you have firms that are looking in more the early and mid-level funding areas, refer them to me and I will refer them to my colleagues that specialize in these parts of minority business development. So at this point, it looks like those were the only questions. If anyone has any additional questions, please don't hesitate. I'm getting a few thank yous. I do appreciate those. Often one of my challenges in the work that I do is the feedback loop. That's why I always encourage as much feedback as possible. Tell me what I'm doing well. Tell me what I'm doing, what areas I can improve in. Tell me what areas I'm not addressing that could be useful to you. Provide that feedback, and you can always email me. I will put my email information back up. Most of the people in this audience are already clients, so they have my information. But if anyone does not, for any reason, please do not hesitate to email me. And yeah, provide me as much feedback as possible so that I can better tailor my activities towards the success of your firm. So if there are no other questions, I've only kept you guys about 4 minutes over what we had billed. I will leave up my email information and contact information here. Again, you can contact me at peter.grabiec@utsa.edu. Any questions, any firms out there that are working in international markets who may be able to benefit from our services, minority-owned firms, please do not hesitate to refer those to me. We're government funded, and so of course there's different cycles on how funding works in the private sector and in the government sector. We are actually in the middle of an expansion in our department, so we have capacity to work with more firms than we have in the past. So if there are any minority-owned firms out there in your purview and in your network that could benefit from our services, again, we're federally funded to provide these services, so they occur at no cost. Once we start doing trade missions again and traveling, when we travel with clients to trade shows in these other countries. At that point, there's some cost recovery mechanisms that happen. We'll usually go with a group of 10 to 12 companies to, you know, a trade show in Mexico or in Chile or in Brazil. And obviously we have some cost recovery for our travel on that. Sometimes when we partner with firms, and in the near future, we have a virtual trade show that we're doing with several organizations in Mexico. That one does have a $900 cost to participate, although it has a very, very detailed methodology. And of course, there's private sector partners in the US and in Mexico that are helping facilitate the matchmaking there. Please email me if you're interested in participating in this and in expanding your presence in Mexico. Obviously, USMCA was signed here over the summer, and we are anticipating a resumption of growth with trade with Mexico as things continue to normalize. So again, I'll leave it at that. Thank you, all of you, for your time. I hope that everyone, all of you and your families, remain safe and healthy out there as we navigate this current environment. Ultimately, people is what all of this is about, is the well-being of people. My expertise is international trade and economics, and I'm here at your disposal. So please do not hesitate to reach out to me. Thank you again for all the thank yous that I'm getting in the chat window as well. And I hope that all of you enjoy the rest of your week and have a great weekend. Goodbye, everyone.